today's video, I'm going to try to do a few custom mixes. I'm getting some things ready that I didn't have specifically mixed up that I thought would be particularly useful. I'm mixing up a neutral blue here, and I've already done a couple tests with my dried paint that's in different palettes before I decided to do this. I'm intentionally mixing the two different paints together here to create a neutral shade of blue. I'm checking as I go along after I'd already previously done tests to work out what I'm doing. I'm working out exactly how to get it to be more of a neutral tone between a warm and a cool blue. It was a little too much on the technical cool side, which is the warm side to my visual perception, so I made it a little more on the neutral side by adding more of the other shade of blue. Oh, there it goes. Now it's time to mix the next color here. I'm working out an additional color here, an ultramarine violet shade. In order to mix that, I note down the 4 different paint colors that I decided to use to mix this color. I'm making sure to keep detailed notes so that if I need to mix this paint again in the future, like when I use up this empty pan that I'm creating a custom mix in, I can mix it again as close as possible. I'm adding a tiny bit of honey to help with rewettability, especially because I found sometimes there's issues with using the hydrous paint. And as you saw, I accidentally knocked it over. In the future, for a lot of these mixes, I'm going to add even less honey because I think I overdid it for a few of my experiments. Sometimes I put too much honey in and other times I didn't put enough to help reactivate it, although it really helped when I put all my Holbein gouache into pans because otherwise Holbein dries up to become a hard rock mess and it can't be re-wet, but by adding a touch of honey it was able to be re-wet. It's a good idea not to overdo it though, because in some of my experiments when I did overdo it, it was really sticky and glossy, and I prefer more matte paints when possible, and it re-wet a little too easily, stayed extremely moist, and in some cases was very sticky and shiny, so I had to readjust the paint. Next, I'm on to another color here. This one actually got mixed up because there was too much, as you saw, overflowing for the ultramarine violet. I put some of the excess into this other half pan and then added a bit more of quinacridone rose to make that color. This color is meant to be very vibrant and bright and glowing, and it's supposed to have quite a punch. It'll be good for additional mixes in the future, but as a standalone color, it's intensely vibrant. It doesn't quite match with the rest of the colors I'm mixing in this video, and it looks different depending on what colors you put near it. It ends up looking much more orange and reddish in comparison to the other colors on this page, but I've seen it actually look a little more pink if you put it next to colors that help it look more pink, if that makes any sense. Well, color relativity is a whole thing that everyone's always continually studying. Every color looks different based on the colors that it's seen near. What is close by to a color? It looks far more orange here, but there are some cases where I've used the same color lately and noticed it looking more pink in other situations. So I think that's very interesting. I mixed it up a bit more till I wanted it to look a little more pink than the initial version, which is a little more orangey. Using different things as a color base or mother color, you can have somewhere to start with for mixing your own custom colors for smaller palettes you mix out of previously mixed and set up colors. Pretty Joy is something that can be an interesting mother color. In fact, all of these technically can. This is a new vibrant black I'm intentionally mixing. I'm calling it Vibrant Black 2. I have a different Vibrant Black, which is anthraquinone mixed with Terra Rosa, both by M. Graham. This is a mix of permanent brown and thiocyanine blue. Permanent brown being from Daniel Smith and the thiocyanine being from M. Graham. This makes a new and also very dark black. I'm trying to get it a little more neutral than the first mix, which was a little too much on the blue side. By adding more of the brown, it makes it more neutral. Here, I'm trying out different options I can do with these paints. It gives me the ability to test specifically the new paints I just made. Even though I don't know if I love this palette together as a palette, it's still an interesting art challenge. And I was just thinking a little bit of a sunset with a dark silhouette. So, using the different paints I mixed, I put a little dragon looking out over an abstracted sunset ocean. Once that dried, I came back in. I decided to try to use only these colors to do something else, because that other painting didn't quite feel like enough. Looking through a tropical fish book, I noticed a fish that was the color of my Fruity Joy paint as a base. Although it would still probably be better if I'd gotten a few more tones that weren't included in this palette, I decided to do a little study of this fish here because I could get a fairly accurate depiction in this limited color palette. In order to get things to gradiate and fade, I decided to wet the area first to work more wet and wet. This is cheap Dollarama sketchbook paper, so it's kind of a risky technique. Using watercolors at all on paper totally not intended for it is something I do sometimes. I'm using a very soft brush. This is a brush I got a long time ago. I think it's pony hair, and it's a natural hairbrush intended for watercolor. It's one of the brushes I'm glad I invested in, but at the same time I actually don't use it quite as often. As I've been using a lot of watercolors and gouache together and less pure watercolors, and because I tend to work tighter. I don't as often use uncontrolled large washes, and I more often am painting in a very tight or realistic manner, although sometimes variety is nice. And of course, depending on the paper type you're using, you'll find different things work for you. Sometimes it's worth the investment to try to force some cheaper paper to work for you. Other times it's worth the investment to invest in more expensive, better papers. Speaking of which, I really have been using mostly my cheap paper and forcing it to work. I really should be forcing myself to use some of my better, more expensive paper to its fullest potential more often. To use the paper I've been investing in, rather than avoiding it. My vibrant black mix makes very good to put the outlines around the white sections of this fish. It's also good to layer things up a little bit. As this paper isn't very good with watercolors, I do have to be careful. Mostly I'm using a gentle hand and letting things really thoroughly dry before going back over. Being a little cautious about using any kind of pressure on this paper because it's fairly susceptible to pilling up, and tending to use more soft brushes, although you can use slightly more springy or less super soft brushes. I just recommend keeping more of a soft hand overall on cheaper papers. I'm using a palette off to the side to mix things up on, including to get some watered down versions of some colors, to get some lighter grays. Sometimes it's a good idea to work around the page, but you have to keep in mind where things are wet and try not to put your hand in wet areas. Sometimes I hold my hand in a strange tripod shape in order to avoid things I've already painted, and other times I work from the upper left corner to the lower right and then let it completely dry. I recommend trying to work on two paintings at once a lot of the time, but obviously not always, in order to go back and forth while you're waiting for one to dry. You can also use a hairdryer to speed up drying time in certain cases. I'm just doing a couple little shapes over here with the colors I was using for these pictures. Because this blank space was a little annoying to me, I decided to fill it in. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you with another one very soon.